The plasma furnace roared like a caged star, its blue-white heart pulsing behind reinforced barriers that hummed with containment fields. Zara wiped sweat from her brow. As she adjusted the thermal regulators, her engineer's instincts reading the subtle changes in the furnace's song. 3 years working the industrial sectors of Nexus Prime had taught her to hear danger in the machine's voice, and today something felt wrong. The warning came as a high-pitched whine that made her teeth ache. She spun toward the control panel, her fingers flying over the emergency shutdown sequence. But she was already too late. The containment field flickered, sparked, and died with a sound like breaking glass. "Everyone out," Zara screamed, her voice barely audible over the furnace's death scream. The plasma core began to destabilize, its carefully contained fusion reaction threatening to turn the entire facility into a crater. Workers scattered like startled birds, their safety gear clattering as they ran for the emergency exits. Zara was halfway to the door when she saw him. A man stood directly in front of the failing containment unit, his back to her, apparently oblivious to the catastrophe unfolding mere meters away. He wore simple work clothes, dark hair falling to his shoulders, and he moved with an odd calm that seemed completely at odds with the chaos around them. "Hey." Zara changed direction, sprinting toward the stranger. "You have to get out of here. The whole thing's going to blow." He turned at her voice, and she caught a glimpse of pale green eyes that seemed to hold depths she couldn't fathom. His face was young but marked with an otherworldly weariness that spoke of experiences beyond his apparent years. "Run," he said simply, his voice carrying clearly despite the industrial mayhem. "This is going to hurt." Before Zara could ask what he meant, the furnace exploded. The blast wave hit her like a physical wall, lifting her off her feet and hurling her backward into a support beam. Her vision went white, then red, then black around the edges as the world dissolved into fire and screaming metal. Through the chaos, she caught a glimpse of something impossible, the stranger standing exactly where she'd left him, engulfed in a pillar of plasma that burned hot enough to melt steel. The emergency suppression systems kicked in with a roar of foam and coolant, but it was too late to save anyone caught in the initial blast. Zara crawled toward the epicenter on hands and knees, her ears ringing, expecting to find nothing but ash where the man had stood. Instead, she found him kneeling in a circle of molten metal. His clothes burned away, but his skin unmarked. Steam rose from his body as if he were cooling from some internal heat. And when he looked up at her approach, those pale green eyes held an apology that cut deeper than any wound. "You're not hurt," she whispered, the words coming out as a statement rather than a question. She couldn't process what she was seeing, couldn't reconcile the evidence of her eyes with everything she knew about human biology and the laws of physics. He stood slowly, unself-consciously naked, and she noticed that his skin seemed to shimmer slightly in the emergency lighting, as if viewed through heat distortion. "The medics will be here soon," he said, avoiding her stare. "You should let them check you for radiation exposure." "What are you?" The question escaped before she could stop it, raw and desperate. For a moment, something vulnerable flickered across his features. "My name is Kale," he said, as if that were any kind of answer. "And you shouldn't have stayed." Emergency klaxons wailed in the distance, growing louder as rescue teams rushed toward the disaster site. Kale glanced in their direction, then back at Zara with an expression that might have been regret. "Wait," she called as he turned to leave. But he was already walking away, somehow finding intact clothing among the debris. Where are you going?" He paused at the edge of the destruction, silhouetted against the emergency lights. "Somewhere else," he said without turning. "Around, somewhere this can't happen again. But the investigation, they'll need statements. They'll find equipment failure," Kale said, and there was a finality in his voice that suggested he'd been through this before. "Old containment systems, improper maintenance, nothing unusual." Zara struggled to her feet, wincing as her bruised ribs protested. "That's not what I saw." "Then you saw wrong." This time he did turn, and the look in his eyes made her step back despite herself. "For your own sake, you saw wrong." The rescue teams rounded the corner in a blaze of lights and sirens, their voices calling out as they began triage procedures. When Zara looked back to where Kale had been standing, He was gone, leaving only footprints in the cooling metal and the lingering scent of ozone. 2 hours later, after the medics had pronounced her miraculously uninjured and the investigators had begun their preliminary examination of the wreckage, Zara found herself staring at the security footage from the incident. The cameras had been damaged by the electromagnetic pulse from the explosion, leaving only fragmentary images that showed the blast, her own flight across the room, and absolutely nothing where Kale had been standing. Equipment failure, the lead investigator concluded, echoing Kale's prediction with unsettling accuracy. The containment field generators were due for replacement 6 months ago. Corporate's been cutting corners on safety maintenance. Zara nodded absently, but her mind was elsewhere, replaying those impossible moments when a man had stood in the heart of a plasma explosion and emerged unharmed. She touched her own arms, feeling the slight tingling that suggested minor radiation exposure, and wondered how someone could walk through fire without even singing the hair on their arms. That night, alone in her small apartment overlooking the industrial district, she found herself scanning the personnel records for any mention of a worker named Kale. The search turned up nothing, as if he'd never existed at all. But when she closed her eyes, she could still see those pale green depths, still hear the quiet certainty in his voice when he'd said it was going to hurt. He'd known what was coming. Somehow, impossibly, he'd known and chosen to face it rather than run. The question that kept her awake until dawn was simple and terrifying. What kind of person doesn't run from certain death, and why had seeing her made him apologize? 3 weeks passed before Zara saw Kale again, and by then she'd almost convinced herself she'd imagined the whole thing. Almost. The official report blamed faulty equipment, just as he'd predicted, and life in the industrial sector had returned to its normal rhythm of shift changes and machinery hums. She was calibrating a new atmospheric processor when she spotted him across the maintenance bay, his dark hair catching the overhead lights as he worked on a damaged power coupling. He wore the same simple work clothes, moved with the same careful precision, but seeing him sent her pulse racing with a mixture of recognition and disbelief. Juno. She called to her friend at the next station. Who's the new guy? Juno glanced up from her diagnostic tablet, following Zara's gaze. Which new guy? Oh, him. Kale something. Started yesterday. Temp worker from the outer colonies. She shrugged. Why? He's cute in that mysterious drifter kind of way. Zara watched as Kale's hands moved over the damaged coupling, seeming to diagnose the problem through pure intuition rather than the standard testing procedures. Has he said much about where he's from? Not really. Quiet type. But his work authorization checked out, and we're short-handed since the furnace incident. Juno raised an eyebrow. You interested? Because I saw him first. Before Zara could answer, an alarm began blaring from Kale's workstation. The power coupling he'd been repairing sparked violently, arcing electricity in dangerous patterns that should have sent him diving for cover. Instead, he calmly reached out with both hands and grasped the sparking components directly. What is he doing? Juno gasped, starting forward. Zara grabbed her arm, remembering the plasma furnace, remembering impossible green eyes reflecting fire. Wait! The electrical discharge flowed through Kale's body like water, his form outlined in crackling energy that should have stopped his heart. But instead of collapsing, he seemed to absorb the power, drawing it into himself until the coupling stopped sparking and hummed with perfectly regulated energy flow. He released the components and stepped back, flexing his fingers as if working out a cramp when he noticed Zara and Juno staring. That same apologetic expression crossed his features. Equipment malfunction, he said, his voice carrying clearly across the bay. Old wiring. Should be fine now. Juno blinked rapidly, then shook her head as if clearing away confusion. Right, of course, good catch. She turned back to her work with the distracted air of someone trying to remember something just out of reach. But Zara remembered everything with crystal clarity. She waited until the shift ended, then followed Kale as he left the facility. He walked with purpose through the industrial district's maze of pipes and catwalks, seemingly unaware of her presence, until he stopped at an overlook above the smelting yards. You're following me, he said without turning around. You remember me. It wasn't a question. I remember everything. Kale faced her, and in the glow of the smelters below, his skin held that same subtle shimmer she'd noticed before. You should forget. Kind of hard to forget watching someone absorb enough electricity to power a small city. Zara stepped closer, studying his face for any sign of deception. What are you, Kale? And don't tell me you're just another temp worker. For a long moment, he was silent, watching the molten metal flow in rivers of light below them. When he spoke, his voice held a loneliness that made her chest ache. I'm someone who doesn't stay in one place very long, because of what you can do, because of what happens when people find out what I can do. He turned those pale green eyes on her, and she saw depths of weariness that belonged to someone much older. They either want to study me, use me, or destroy me, sometimes all three. Zara felt a surge of protective anger that surprised her. Not everyone is like that. No. Kale's smile held no humor. Then why are you here, Zara? What do you want from me? The question hung between them like a challenge, and Zara realized she didn't have a simple answer. She'd followed him partly from curiosity, partly from the need to understand what she'd witnessed. But there was something more, something about the way he'd apologized for surviving, the way he carried himself as if expecting rejection at any moment. I want to know why you looked so sad, she said finally in the furnace room. When you saw me, you looked like you were sorry for what I was about to see. Kale's expression softened, surprise replacing wariness. You're not afraid of me. Should I be? Most people are. Once they understand, the smelters below shifted into a new cycle, sending up fountains of sparks that painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. In that light, Zara could see the truth written in every line of Kale's face. He was tired of running, tired of hiding, tired of being alone with whatever made him different. Maybe I'm not most people, she said. Something changed in his expression then. A crack in the careful walls he'd built around himself. He reached out hesitantly, his fingertips barely brushing her cheek, and she felt warmth that had nothing to do with the smelters below. You don't know what you're saying, he whispered. Then show me. Kale's hands stilled against her skin, and for a heartbeat she thought he might pull away. Instead, he closed his eyes and let his barriers drop. The change was subtle at first, just an increase in the warmth of his touch. But then she felt it building, energy flowing through him, like a tide, making the air around them shimmer with heat distortion. His skin began to glow softly, veins of light tracing patterns beneath the surface like circuitry made of fire. The temperature rose until the metal railing under her other hand became too hot to touch. But his fingers against her face remained gentle, perfectly controlled. This is what I am, he said, opening eyes that now burned with their own light. I don't just survive fire and electricity. I am fire and electricity. I'm the next step in human evolution, adapted for worlds where the very air would kill normal people. Zara stared at him in wonder rather than fear, watching the play of light beneath his skin. You're beautiful. Kale's control wavered, the glow intensifying for a moment before he pulled his hand away and stepped back. I'm dangerous, he corrected, his voice rough. I've killed people just by losing control for a few seconds. But you didn't lose control just now, no, he admitted. With you it's different. Before either of them could explore what that meant, a new sound intruded on their moment, the whine of approaching engines. 3 corporate security vehicles were climbing the access road toward their position, moving with the purposeful speed of a hunting pack. Kale cursed under his breath, the glow fading from his skin as he focused on the approaching threat. They found me faster than usual. Who found you? People who want to turn me into a weapon. He was already backing toward the maintenance tunnels, but his eyes remained fixed on her face. I have to go, Zara, and you can't come with me. Like hell. I can't. She moved to follow him, but he caught her shoulders gently. They'll hurt you to get to me, he said. That's how they work. Please, just forget you ever saw me. The security vehicles were getting closer, their searchlights beginning to sweep the overlook. Kale pressed something into her hand, a small piece of metal that was warm to the touch, and inscribed with symbols she didn't recognize. If you really want to understand, he said, find out where this came from, but be careful who you ask. Then, he was gone, disappearing into the tunnel system, with the fluid grace of someone who'd spent years perfecting the art of escape. Zara clutched the metal token and watched the security teams spread out across the overlook, their movements coordinated and professional. "Mum," one of them called, approaching with his weapon lowered but ready. "We're looking for someone who may have been in this area. Tall, dark hair, probably traveling alone." Zara looked at the token in her palm, feeling its warmth pulse like a heartbeat, and made her choice. "Haven't seen anyone like that," she lied smoothly. "Just came up here to watch the smelters." The security officer studied her face for a long moment, then nodded curtly. "If you do see him, contact corporate security immediately. He's extremely dangerous." As the search teams fanned out through the industrial district, Zara remained on the overlook, staring at the token and remembering the way Kale's skin had glowed like captured starlight. Whatever he was, wherever he'd come from, she was going to find out the truth. And maybe, just maybe, she was going to help him find a place where he didn't have to run anymore. The symbols on Kale's token led Zara down paths she'd never imagined existed. 3 days of careful research through the colony's data archives revealed references to something called the Ember Project, a terraforming initiative that had sent volunteers to adapt humanity for high-radiation worlds. The project had been classified, then canceled, then erased from official records entirely. She was deep in a restricted database when her apartment security system chimed softly, announcing a visitor. Zara's blood chilled when she saw the man on her door monitor, tall, silver-haired, wearing the distinctive black uniform of corporate enforcement. Behind him stood 2 others, their faces hidden behind tactical visors. "Miss Chen, I mean, Miss Rivera," the lead officer corrected himself, checking a data pad. "I'm Enforcement Agent Thorne. We'd like to ask you a few questions about the individual you may have encountered." Near the smelting overlook, Zara's finger hovered over the door controls, every instinct screaming at her to keep the barrier between them. "I already spoke to your people. I didn't see anyone." "Of course not," Thorne said, his smile cold and knowing. "But you did receive something from him, didn't you? A small token of some kind?" Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her voice steady. "I don't know what you're talking about. Miss Rivera, we know you've been accessing classified databases for the past 72 hours. We know you've been researching the Ember Project, and we know that our target has made contact with you." Thorne's expression hardened. "Now you can cooperate willingly, or we can make this much more difficult for everyone involved." The threat was clear, but before Zara could respond, the lights in her apartment flickered and dimmed. The temperature began to rise noticeably, and she caught a familiar scent in the air, ozone and burning metal. "You should leave," she said to Thorne, though she wasn't entirely sure why. "I don't think so." Thorne gestured to his companions, who began working on the door's electronic locks. "In fact, I think this conversation is about to become much more interesting." The apartment's environmental systems whined in protest as the temperature continued climbing. Condensation began forming on the windows, and Zara's skin prickled with static electricity. Behind the enforcement agents, the corridor's lights started flickering in a pattern that reminded her of a heartbeat. "Thorne," one of the other agents said, his voice tight with concern, "energy readings are spiking across the entire block. Something's coming." That was when the lights went out entirely, plunging them into darkness broken only by the emergency strips along the floor. But the darkness didn't last long. A soft glow began building at the far end of the corridor, growing brighter with each passing second. Kale emerged from the maintenance access like a figure from myth, his entire body wreathed in controlled flame that cast dancing shadows on the walls. The air around him shimmered with heat distortion, and when he spoke, his voice carried the rumble of distant thunder. "Let her go, Thorne." The enforcement agent spun toward the new rival, his weapon appearing in his hand with practiced speed. Well, the Ember himself, you know. You've caused us quite a lot of trouble over the years." "Not nearly as much as I'm about to cause you," Kale replied, taking a step forward. The floor plates beneath his feet began to glow cherry red from the heat. "I wouldn't." Thorne's weapon swung toward Zara's door. "She's in there, and these walls aren't nearly as fireproof as you'd like to think. One wrong move from you, and she burns along with everything else. Kale's advance stopped, the flames around him flickering with his emotional state. Zara could see the conflict in his blazing eyes, the terrible choice between protecting her and protecting himself. "What do you want?" Kale asked. "The same thing we've always wanted. Your cooperation." Thorne's smile was predatory. "There are 3 colony ships full of people heading into the scorched nebula. The radiation levels will kill them all within days of arrival, unless they have someone like you to shield the life support systems. And after I save your colonists, what then? Then you save the next group, and the next, until we've claimed every dead world in this sector." Thorne's voice turned cold. "Did you really think we'd let an asset like you just wander the galaxy? You're too valuable to waste on freedom." The corridor's temperature continued rising, and Zara could smell the plastic components in the walls beginning to soften. But she also noticed something else. The token Kale had given her was growing warm in her pocket. Warm enough to burn if she'd been holding it directly, acting on instinct. She pressed her palm against the door's manual release, letting the token's heat transfer through her skin to the mechanism. The locks disengaged with a soft click. "The choice is simple," Thorne continued, unaware of Zara's actions. "Come with us voluntarily, and the girl lives. Resist, and she becomes collateral damage." Kale's flames began to dim, resignation replacing anger in his expression. "You win." "Thorne, just let me say goodbye." "How touching." Thorne lowered his weapon slightly. "Make it quick." Kale approached the door, each step leaving glowing footprints in the corridor floor. When he was close enough, he pressed his hand against the surface and whispered, "Trust me." The next few seconds unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance of destruction. Kale's form suddenly blazed with intensity that turned the corridor air into a furnace. The enforcement agents threw up their arms, crying out as their tactical visors cracked from the heat differential. In that moment of confusion, Zara yanked open her door and dove into Kale's waiting arms. Instead of the burning death she expected, his embrace felt like stepping into a warm bath. His powers wrapped around her like a protective cocoon, shielding her from the inferno he'd unleashed in the corridor. She felt him lift her, felt the sensation of movement and heat and blazing light. And then they were somewhere else entirely. They emerged onto the colony's outermost maintenance platform. The industrial district spread out below them like a circuit, board made of light. Kale's flames had dimmed to their usual soft glow, but she could feel the tension in his body as he scanned for pursuit. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his hands moving over her arms and face with gentle concern. "I'm fine." She caught his wrists, marveling at the way his skin felt perfectly normal despite the energy she could see flowing beneath it. "But they'll keep coming, won't they?" "Yes." Kale's expression was grim. "Thorne's right about one thing. I am valuable to them, and now they know you matter to me, which makes you valuable too. Then we leave together." Kale shook his head. "You don't understand what that means. I can't live like normal people. Zara, I need temperatures that would cook you alive. I eat raw energy instead of food. And I'm not the only one out there. There are others from the Ember Project, and some of them." He trailed off, but she could see the fear in his eyes. "Some of them are dangerous. Some of them are insane. The process that made us, it doesn't always work perfectly. And the ones who broke, they're exactly the kind of weapons Thorne wants to create." Zara thought of the token, still warm in her pocket, and the research she'd uncovered about worlds where humans had been changed by necessity and isolation. The Ember Project wasn't just about terraforming, was it? No, Kale admitted. It was about evolution. Forced evolution to survive in places where baseline humans couldn't exist. They sent us to hell worlds and watched to see what we'd become. And what did you become? Kale looked at her with those impossible green eyes, and she saw not a monster or a weapon, but someone who'd been shaped by forces beyond his control and was trying desperately to remain human despite everything that had been done to him. "I became someone who could love you," he said simply, "and that scares them more than any weapon ever could." Before Zara could respond to that stunning admission, new lights appeared in the distance, more enforcement vehicles, closing in on their position with relentless precision. Kale's jaw tightened as he calculated angles and distances. "They're hurting us," he realized. "This isn't just a capture operation, it's a trap. That was when the real hunters revealed themselves. 3 figures rose from concealment positions round the platform, their forms wreathed in the same energy patterns as Kale, but twisted into something darker, more violent. Their eyes burned with madness, and when they smiled, it was with the anticipation of violence. "Hello, brother," one of them called, her voice like breaking glass. "Time to come home." Kale stepped protectively in front of Zara, his own power flaring in response to the threat. "Run," he told her quietly. "Whatever happens, just run." But Zara had made her choice weeks ago when she'd first seen him emerge from that plasma fire. She wasn't running anywhere. The corrupted Emberborn moved like predators circling wounded prey, their twisted forms radiating heat that made the platform's metal decking glow. Cherry red beneath their feet, Zara recognized the madness in their eyes, the same look she'd seen in old footage of soldiers suffering from neural burnout, minds fractured by experiences no human psyche was meant to endure. "Kale of Nexus 7, the leader hissed, her voice carrying harmonics that suggested her vocal cords had been replaced with something inhuman. "The Golden Child, Thorn's favorite success story, Vera," Kale replied, his own power building in response to their proximity. "I thought they'd put you down after Kepler Station." "Put me down," Vera laughed, the sound like metal tearing. "They tried to fix me, tried to make me stable like you. But I embraced what we really are, evolution's answer to a hostile universe." The other to flank them with synchronized precision, cutting off escape routes with casual efficiency. One was male, his skin appearing to have partially crystallized into something resembling living diamond. The other moved in and out of visible light, her form flickering between solid matter and pure energy. "What do you want?" Kale demanded, though his stance suggested he already knew the answer. "To show you the truth," Vera said, gesturing to Zara with casual contempt. "You're wasting yourself on baseline humans, playing at being normal when you could be a god among mortals. I've seen what your kind of godhood looks like." Kale shot back. "Kepler Station, New Damascus, burnt worlds and empty colonies, necessary sacrifices." The crystalline one spoke for the first time, his voice carrying subsonic frequencies that made Zara's bones ache. "The weak die so the strong can inherit the stars." Zara felt the token in her pocket growing hot enough to brand flesh, but also noticed something else. The symbols etched into its surface were beginning to glow with their own light. Whatever Kale had given her, it was reacting to the presence of the other Emberborn. "You're wrong," she said, stepping out from behind Kale's protective stance. "Evolution isn't about replacing the weak, it's about adaptation. That helps the entire species survive." Vera's burning gaze fixed on her with predatory interest. "The pet speaks. How precious." She raised one hand, energy crackling between her fingers. "Perhaps we should demonstrate the futility of baseline human existence." The attack came as a lance of pure plasma, hot enough to vaporize steel. But instead of striking Zara, it met a barrier of controlled flame as Kale interposed himself, absorbing and redirecting the energy with practiced skill. The redirected blast struck the platform's support structure, sending a shower of molten metal cascading into the industrial district below. "Impressive," the crystalline one observed. "But can you protect her from all of us simultaneously?" They attacked in perfect coordination. 3 directions at once, each strike calculated to force Kale into an impossible choice. He moved like liquid fire, deflecting what he could, absorbing what he couldn't deflect. But Zara could see the strain building in his movements. He was powerful, but not powerful enough to fight 3 opponents while protecting her. That was when the platform shuddered under the impact of something massive. Enforcement vehicles rose into view around them, their weapons charging with an ominous whine. Thorn's voice echoed from amplified speakers mounted on the lead craft. "Surrender now, and the baseline human survives this encounter. Continue fighting, and will be forced to consider her acceptable losses." Vera laughed again, her form blazing brighter. "Perfect, let them all see what gods do to mortals." She launched herself at one of the enforcement vehicles, moving too fast for human reflexes to track. Her superheated form punched through the craft's armored hull like a bullet through paper, and it began spinning toward the platform in a controlled crash that would kill everyone aboard. Kale made his choice in the space between heartbeats. He abandoned his defensive position and leaped toward the falling vehicle, his body erupting into a miniature star as he intercepted its trajectory. The impact drove him to his knees on the platform's edge, but he held the multi-ton craft steady, preventing its crash. "Now you see," Vera called mockingly. "This is what caring for the weak gets you, weakness." But she had underestimated both Kel's resolve and Zara's resourcefulness. While the corrupted Emberborn gloated, Zara had been studying the token's growing luminescence, recognizing patterns in its symbols that matched the energy flows she could see around Kale. Whatever the device was, it was designed to interact with Ember physiology. She pressed the token against the platform's central power coupling, using her engineer's knowledge to create a feedback loop through the station's electrical grid. The result was immediate and dramatic. Every power conduit in the industrial district began channeling energy toward their location, creating a vast web of electrical force centered on the platform. The effect on the Emberborn was instantaneous. Their carefully controlled power matrices destabilized as raw energy flooded their systems, forcing them to either absorb the massive influx or risk explosive decompression. Of their cellular structures, Kale understood first, his training allowing him to ride the energy wave instead of fighting it. His form became a pillar of controlled fusion, drawing power from the grid and channeling it into precise strikes against his opponents. Vera screamed as coherent plasma tore through her defenses, while the crystalline one shattered under the thermal stress of rapid temperature changes. The flickering woman tried to phase out of normal space, but the energy grid followed her into whatever dimension she accessed, burning away her ability to maintain coherence. She rematerialized fully solid and collapsed, smoke rising from her overloaded neural pathways. When the light faded, only Kale remained standing, his form still glowing with residual power. The three corrupted Emberborn lay unconscious but alive, their enhanced physiology having saved them from permanent damage around them. Enforcement vehicles landed with the cautious precision of scavengers approaching wounded predators. Thorn emerged from the lead craft, his expression mixing admiration with calculation. "Impressive display," he said, studying the aftermath, "but ultimately pointless. You've proven exactly why we need you under corporate control." "I've proven that I choose who I protect," Kale replied, moving to stand beside Zara. "And it's not going to be your colonists. I'm afraid that choice isn't yours to make anymore." Thorn gestured, and a dozen weapons focused on Zara. "The woman has become a security risk. Her knowledge of the Ember Project, combined with her obvious influence over you, makes her too dangerous to leave uncontrolled." Zara felt Kel's power spike with rage, but she also noticed something else: footsteps on the access ladder behind Thorn's position. Someone was climbing toward the platform, moving with the careful stealth of a trained engineer who knew exactly how to approach. Without triggering motion sensors, "You're making a mistake, Thorn," she said, buying time. The Ember Project wasn't just about creating super soldiers. It was about preparing humanity for a universe that's actively trying to kill us. "Spare me the philosophical debate," Thorn snapped. "You're both coming with us, and that's final." "Actually," said a new voice from behind him, "I think you'll find that decision has been overruled." Marcus Rivera, Zara's older brother and senior colonial administrator, stepped onto the platform flanked by a full security detail, wearing the insignia of planetary authority rather than corporate enforcement. His weathered face bore the kind of determined expression that had made him effective in colonial politics. "This is a corporate operation," Thorn protested. "You have no jurisdiction here." "Nexus Prime Colonial Charter, Section 12, Marcus replied smoothly. "Any operation involving potential weapons of mass destruction requires colonial oversight, and I'm pretty sure 3 uncontrolled Emberborn qualify." The standoff stretched taut between corporate and colonial authority, weapons trained in multiple directions as loyalties sorted themselves out. But Zara barely noticed the political maneuvering. Her attention was fixed on Kale, who was staring at Marcus with an expression of growing recognition. "You're the one who sent the token," Kale said quietly. "You're the one who's been tracking Ember survivors." Marcus nodded gravely. "The Ember Project was classified. But not everyone agreed with its termination. Some of us believed you deserved better than to be hunted like dangerous animals. Some of us. Kale's eyes narrowed. How many people know what we are? Enough, Marcus replied. And now that corporate has decided to weaponize you, it's time for those people to take action. Thorne's expression shifted from annoyance to alarm as he realized the implications. You're talking about harboring fugitive assets. That's treason. Against the colonial charter. No, Marcus said calmly. That's evolution. The battle that followed was brief but decisive. Colonial security had home advantage and superior numbers, while corporate enforcement was operating far from their support base. When the dust settled, Thorne and his surviving agents were in custody, and the unconscious Emberborn were being prepared for transport to a medical facility equipped to handle their unique physiology. As dawn broke over Nexus Prime, Zara found herself standing on the platform's edge beside Kale, watching the industrial district come alive with the morning shift change. His power had dimmed to its usual gentle glow, but she could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. So what happens now? She asked. Now we find out if your brother's resistance network is real, Kale replied, and if there's actually a place in this galaxy where people like me can exist, without being weapons or prisoners. Zara took his hand, intertwining their fingers and marveling at how perfectly they fit together despite their fundamental differences. Whatever we find it together. Kale's smile was the first genuinely happy expression she'd ever seen on his face. Together. He agreed. I like the sound of that. 5 years later, the morning sun painted the sky above Haven Colony in shades of amber and gold that reminded Zara of the light that lived beneath Kale's skin. She stood on the observation deck of their home, a structure built into the side of a volcanic mountain, where the geothermal energy provided natural power for the settlement's unique inhabitants. Mama, look what I made, Nova burst through the door with the boundless energy of a 4-year-old, clutching a small sculpture crafted from what appeared to be crystallized flame. The child's skin held a subtle luminescence that shifted between her father's pale green glow and something uniquely her own tiny constellations of light that danced beneath the surface. Like captured stars, it's beautiful, sweetheart, Zara said, kneeling to examine her daughter's creation. The sculpture was warm to the touch and seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat, a perfect fusion of artistic vision and inherited abilities. Daddy taught me how to make the fire solid, Nova explained proudly. He says I'm getting really good at it. She surpassed what I could do at her age, Kale said, emerging from the workshop where he'd been helping other Emberborn learn to control their abilities. His appearance had changed little over the years, but there was a peace in his expression that had been absent during their first meeting. Though I think she gets her artistic sense from you, Zara smiled, remembering the early days when they'd first arrived at Haven Colony. Marcus's resistance network had been more extensive than any of them had imagined, a loose confederation of scientists, colonial administrators, and military personnel who believed the Emberborn represented humanity's future rather than its. Doomed. Haven itself was a testament to that vision, built on a world where the ambient radiation would kill baseline humans within hours. It served as a sanctuary for Ember survivors while simultaneously proving their value as colonists. The geothermal plants that powered the settlement operated at temperatures that would melt conventional equipment, but were perfectly manageable for people who could absorb and redirect energy. The new rivals are settling in well, Kale continued, settling beside them on the deck. 3 more from the Scorched Nebula, and 2 who've been hiding in the Outer Rim for years. Any problems with instability? Zara asked. The corrupted Emberborn they'd encountered on Nexus Prime had proven treatable once proper medical facilities became available. But the psychological trauma of years in hiding sometimes manifested in dangerous ways. Nothing Vera and her team can't handle, Kale assured her. She's become quite the counselor since her recovery. It still amazed Zara how completely Vera had transformed. The woman who'd once wanted to rule over baseline humans now spent her days helping other Emberborn integrate their abilities with their humanity. Her insight into the corruption process had been invaluable in developing treatments for the psychological damage caused by corporate experimentation. A soft chime from Zara's communication unit interrupted her thoughts. The message was from Marcus, now serving as Haven Colony's official liaison with the wider human government. Corporate task force detected at the outer system perimeter. Estimate 6 hours until arrival. Recommends standard protocols. Kale read the message over her shoulder, but his expression remained calm. Standard protocols meant something very different than they would have 5 years ago. Haven Colony was no longer a hidden refugee, it was an officially recognized human settlement, with full diplomatic status and defensive capabilities that made corporate raids both illegal and impractical. Should we be worried? Zara asked. Not anymore, Kale replied, gesturing toward the valley below where other Emberborn were going about their daily routines. Some tended crystalline gardens that grew in conditions no baseline plant could survive. Others worked in the energy refinement facilities that processed raw stellar radiation into usable power. Still others, like Nova, simply played and learned and grew up believing their abilities were gifts rather than curses. The old corporate model assumed we were aberrations to be controlled or eliminated, Kale continued. But we've proven we're something else entirely: human evolution in response to a hostile universe. And evolution doesn't ask permission. That afternoon, they watched from the observation deck as a corporate task force entered Heaven's orbital space. The ships were impressive, but they maintained a respectful distance and requested permission to approach, rather than demanding immediate surrender. The lead vessel docked at Heaven's orbital station with ceremonial precision, and its passengers were escorted to the surface by Nova herself, a diplomatic gesture that had become tradition. Whenever new visitors arrived, the 4-year-old served as living proof that Emberborn weren't monsters, but rather the next step in humanity's expansion among the stars. The corporate delegation was led by a woman Zara didn't recognize. Someone younger than Thorn had been, and apparently more willing to adapt to changing circumstances. She accepted the guided tour of the colony with professional interest, asking technical questions about the power systems and environmental controls. Impressive, she admitted as they stood in the central plaza where Emberborn and visiting baseline humans worked side by side. Our analysts predicted this settlement would collapse within 6 months due to internal conflicts. Your analysts were working from flawed assumptions, Marcus replied diplomatically. They assumed power corrupts, but they forgot that power also creates responsibility. The corporate representative nodded thoughtfully, which brings us to our proposal. The Colonial Expansion Initiative has identified 17 worlds in the Vale Nebula that could support human habitation if certain environmental challenges were overcome. Challenges that appear well suited to Emberborn capabilities. Kale and Zara exchanged glances. The offer was essentially what Thorn had tried to force years ago. But the context had changed completely. Instead of slavery disguised as service, this sounded like genuine partnership. What exactly are you proposing? Kale asked. Joint colonial ventures. Emberborn working alongside baseline humans to establish settlements and environments where neither could survive alone. Full citizenship, legal protections, and profit-sharing agreements for all participants. It was, Zara realized, exactly what the Ember Project should have been from the beginning: cooperation rather than exploitation, partnership rather than servitude. The negotiations took 3 days, but the outcome was never really in doubt. Haven Colony had proven that Emberborn could coexist with baseline humanity, and the corporate sector had finally recognized the economic potential of that cooperation. The agreement that emerged would establish a new model for human expansion into hostile environments. On the final evening of the talks, Zara found herself back on the observation deck with Kale and Nova, watching the